Good afternoon, Ambassador Chabert, Acting Director of the Institute of International Relations, Dr. Jacqueline LaGuardia Martinez, members of the Diplomatic Corps, U.W.I staff and students, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this session of the Diplomatic Dialogues. I am Dr. Georgina Shami, and I'm delighted to be your chair for this afternoon session. Before introducing our guest speaker, I would like to ask Dr. LaGuardia Martinez, our Acting Director, Institute of International Relations, to deliver the welcome remarks. Dr. Martinez?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much, Dr. Shami, for this introduction. My welcome remarks are going to be very brief. First, I would like to welcome everyone to this session, people in the Zoom, people in the room. I would like especially to welcome Ambassador Didier Chabert. I believe this is the first time you visit our institute, so welcome. We hope this is the first, but definitely not the last time. I also would like to send you to share greetings from Dr. Anita Montut. She's away, she cannot be here today with us, but she wishes all of you to have a very productive and enjoyable session. And she apologized for not being here with us today. This is the last diplomatic dialogue for academic year 2022-2023. And I believe the topic that we are going to be discussing today is of tremendous importance. Ambassador Chabert is going to be speaking about the European Union as a main player in global security. And I cannot think about a better issue for us to have this final discussion. And I would like to encourage you, all of you following by Zoom and people here in the room to engage in the discussions when we hear the key speaker. Before I end these welcome remarks, I would like to acknowledge the presence here in the room of Professor Lancelot Cowie, who is accompanying us today. We also have Professor Dukeran. Thank you so much for being with us here today. And our very recent and shiny Dr. Lisa Gordon, former student. Thank you for joining us today as well. And we also have Mr. Brian Awang. I believe you are a consultant in the sphere of finance and banking, so also a great expert to have with us in the room today. For the ones that are via Zoom, and I don't know who you are because I cannot see the list of participants, welcome and very pleased that you are with us. I'm taking no more time from our keynote speaker. So, Ambassador Didier Chabert, again, welcome. Bienvenue à l'Institut de Relations Internationales. And s'il vous plaît. Well, Dr. Georgina Shami, sorry. I'm breaking protocols. I'm not the chair. Sorry, Madam Chair.
Muchísimas gracias. Merci beaucoup, Dr. Martinez. So I will briefly introduce our guest speaker for today. We are very honored, of course, to have His Excellency Didier Chabert with us at the Institute of International Relations. Ambassador Chabert holds diplomas from the EC Paris School of Management in Paris, Institute of Political Affairs, and he's also a graduate of the French National School of Administration. He has been serving in the field of foreign affairs since 1987 and has held a number of different positions, which include the strategic management in charge of NATO. He was former Deputy Director for the Middle East, Deputy Permanent Representative at the Permanent Representation of France to the European Union's Political and Security Committee, Deputy Head of Mission in Beirut, and Ambassador Extraordinaire and Plenipotentiary in Kosovo. Since 2021, Ambassador Extraordinaire and Plenipotentiary to Trinidad and Tobago, and we are delighted to have him here today as he presents on the topic, Soft Power or Hard Power. Is the European Union a positive player in global security? Given the title, I'm sure it will stimulate a lot of discussion. I am pleased to warmly invite you to provide your discourse to us today, Your Excellency.
Thank you also. Hello. I think it's better now. Can you hear me? Yeah. So thank you very much, Dr. Chami. Thank you, Dr. LaGuardia Martinez. I will also thank Professor and Minister Winston Dukeran to make us the honor to be here, Professor Lancelot Covey and Dr. Lisa Gordon. But I must say that it's really for me a pleasure and an honor to be here this afternoon to present a subject which is important for the region, important for the EU, and also important to me, which is European Union. Is it a soft power or hard power? First, a short clarification on the concept. Hard power is the possibility of exerting coercive pressure on other countries using political, economic, and military means. Soft power is a policy of influence based on cooperation, cultural and linguistic influence, and commitment to multilateral solutions to solve international crises. When it was created in 1957, thinking that the European Union could be something other than a pure soft power was a nonsense, because its initial objectives were limited to ensuring the free movement of goods, capital, and people within it. But since 1957, the world changed, and the European Union itself has profoundly changed. I will not deal in my presentation with the internal structures of the European Union, first because it would be long and boring, but with its means of action on the international scene, which, by their constant strengthening, makes this organization today one of the three major poles of international geopolitics, with undeniable strengths, but also weaknesses on which we will return. My intervention will be structured in a very linear way. First, by presenting the tools of European soft power, and then by demonstrating that the European Union already has all the attributes of a hard power, which are being strengthened. So the European Union, alongside with the United States and China, occupies a leading position as one of the world's major soft power powers. Internationally, the EU wields significant influence through its financial impact. The euro plays a crucial role as reference currency, accounting, as you can see here on the shield, for 22% of world's foreign exchange reserves held by central banks, compared with 58% for the US dollar and 5.5% for the Japanese yen. What's more, the euro is the second most traded currency, just behind the US dollar, with a share of 55% of all trade for the USD and 37% for the euro. The euro offers guarantees and free trading markets without seeking to exert excessive control of the countries that use it. Europe's renewed financial centers such as Frankfurt, Paris, Milan, and Madrid play an important role in the global financial system, reinforcing the EU's influence on the international stage. The European Union exerts a significant influence on the international scene through a multitude of actions and commitments. First, the EU is actively involved in peacekeeping operations in various parts of the world. It deploys civilian and military missions to contribute to stability, promote peace and security, and facilitate conflict resolution. I will come back on the issue with more detail later on, but these efforts demonstrate the EU's commitment to promoting a peaceful world order and a peaceful resolution of disputes. Then the EU is also positioning itself as a key player in the fight against climate change. The Paris Agreement on climate change are a convincing example of the EU's commitment to take action to protect the environment. The EU has set itself ambitious targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, making the transition to renewable energies and adopting policies that promote environment sustainability by taking concrete actions and encouraging international cooperation. The EU seeks to address global environmental challenges and preserve the planet for future generations. When it comes to human rights, the EU plays also an important role as a defender of the universal values of dignity, freedom, and respect for fundamental rights. It condemns human rights violations around the world and uses various diplomatic, economic, and political instruments to promote human rights and support human rights defenders. The EU sets up political dialogues and assistance programs to help partner countries strengthen their institutions and improve respect for human rights. Finally, the EU is also a fervent supporter of multilateralism. It promotes international cooperation and encourages the resolution of global problems through dialogue and collaboration between nations. The EU supports international organizations such as the United Nations agencies, and other multilateral forums. It promotes consensus building, negotiation, and implementation of international agreements to address common challenges such as trade, security, sustainable development, and many other areas. As you can see, the European Union occupies a leading position in industrial production, accounting for a considerable 18% of global industrial output. This statistic testifies the EU's economic strength and its central role in the global economy. With a diversified and competitive industrial base, the EU is a key player in sectors such as car industry, aerospace, chemical, pharmaceuticals, technology, and many others. European companies are recognized for their excellence, innovation, and ability to provide quality products and services on a global scale. In addition to its industrial strengths, the EU is also actively involved in official development assistance. In fact, you can see that 43, almost half of the world development aid comes from the EU institutions and EU member states. This substantial contribution reflects the EU's commitment to supporting developing countries and fostering economic and social progress on a global scale. The EU implements aid and cooperation programs in various areas such as health, education, agriculture, infrastructure, governance, and many others. The aim is to reduce poverty, strengthen the capacities of partner countries, and promote sustainable and inclusive development. Internally, the European Union is demonstrating considerable power and influence across a range of areas, with research and development occupying a prominent place. Europe has produced many brilliant minds who have been awarded prestigious Nobel Prizes. As you can see, since 2002, the EU has won an impressive number of Nobel Prizes, with 17 in chemistry, 19 in physics, 9 in physiology or medicine, and also 22 Fields Medals since 2002. Fields Medal is a Nobel Prize for mathematics. And these international distinctions bear witness of the excellence of European research and its significant contribution to global scientific progress. The EU is also a leader in innovation. The EU counts for 44% of all patents filed, demonstrating its key role in the development and protection of intellectual property. 44% of patents deposed worldwide. So the EU actively supports research and development through programs and initiatives aimed at promoting innovation, encouraging collaboration between players in the sector, and stimulating economic growth through the exploitation of scientific knowledge and discoveries. Then, the European Union cultural influence is an essential element of its non-coercive power of influence. The EU stands out for its significant contribution in the field of literature, with 53% of the Nobel Prizes in literature awarded since the Second World War. In the arts also, the EU plays a major role. Prestigious events such as the Cannes Film Festival, which showcase European and world cinema, provides a showcase for the EU cinematic talent. Contemporary art fairs organized in France, Italy, Germany, and other European countries showcase European artistic creativity and attract artists from all over the world. Fashion is another area in which the EU excels, with fashion capitals such as Paris and Milan influencing global trends and being recognized for their creativity and expertise. Theatre occupies also an important part in the European cultural scene, with renewed festivals such as the festival in Avignon. And finally, language plays a key role in spreading European culture around the world. Languages like English, Spanish, French, German, and other European languages are widely used in communication, education, research, and culture, helping to promote and transmit European values. At the same time, the EU is pursuing an increasingly integrated policy characterized by transfers of sovereignty between member states. The EU internal market area facilitates the free movement of goods, services, people, and capital, creating a favorable economic dynamic and strengthening regional integration. This development has led to increased interdependence amongst member states. We recognize the benefits of closer cooperation in tackling common challenges such as economic development, environmental protection, security, and the promotion of human rights. The EU is therefore putting common policies and harmonized regulations in place to promote cohesion and solidarity amongst its members. But if it's very clear, according to the elements I could present, that European Union is really a leading soft power on the global scene, the European Union has also all the attributes today of a strong hard power that is in the process to be strengthened. So if you can see now, European Union has one member with a permanent seat on the UN Security Council, one nuclear power amongst its members, and if you consider, which is really very few known, the European Union has more active and reserve soldiers than the United States, and is the second, according to the number of its armies, the second military power in the world, if we take, of course, this criteria. It should be noted that the EU is primarily an economic and political union, and its military dimension is complementary to its other areas of actions. The EU does have a significant military capability and can be considered as an emerging military power. The EU has developed joint military capabilities through permanent structured cooperation, what we call PESCO, which aims to strengthen defense cooperation between member states. This has led to joint defense projects, such as the creation of EU battle groups and the development of joint military capabilities in areas such as cyber defense, counterterrorism, civil protection, and peacekeeping operations. In addition, the EU has established political and military structures to support its security and defense efforts. The Political and Security Committee, PSC, is responsible for crisis management and political decision-making in the field of the common security and defense policy. The European Union Military Committee and the European Union Military Staff, EUMS, is responsible for planning and conducting military operations and providing military advice to the EU institutions. The EU has also a solid defense, industrial and technological base. EU member states are among the world's leading arms producers and collaborate closely on research and development projects. The European defense industry is known for its innovation and quality, contributing to the EU's military capability. The EU, as I said shortly before, is also actively involved in peacekeeping and crisis management operations around the world through the implementation of United Nations resolutions. As part of the common security and defense policy, it deploys civilians and military missions, such as the Atalanta naval operation of the Horn of Africa to combat piracy off the coast of Somalia, or the European Force, Chad and the Central African Republic, EUFOR Chad RCA, which aims to implement a UN Security Council resolution by protecting refugee camps in both countries. These operations are conducted in support of international peacekeeping, stabilization, and crisis management efforts, and are approved by the United Nations Security Council when necessary. The European Union respects the principle of international law and seeks to act in accordance with United Nations resolutions and always with the consent of the host country. However, it's important to underline that decisions on security and defense remain the responsibility of the member states. The EU acts first as a forum for coordination, cooperation, and mutual support amongst its members in the field of security and defense. It is also true that the EU's defense policy is based on the principle of European Union's decisions-making autonomy, while at the same time being committed to close cooperation with NATO. Only 5 EU member states are not members of NATO. The EU member states that are also members of NATO ensure their mutual defense in accordance with the principles of Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, which states that any attack on the territory of one of its members and coming from outside is considered an attack against all of them. The EU and NATO are working closely together to guarantee security and defense in Europe by strengthening cooperation, coordination, and complementarity between the two organizations. With regard of economic sanctions, the EU has a mechanism for imposing sanctions in response to behavior or actions considered to be contrary to international law, human rights, international peace and security. Economic sanctions are a tool of pressure and deterrence used by the EU to promote compliance with international standards and encourage change in the behavior of the actors concerned. But when introducing sanctions, the EU takes care to minimize the negative impact on the civilian population by putting in place mitigating measures and specifically targeting those responsible for wrongdoing rather than the population at large. For example, very simply, the European Union sanctions against Venezuela concern only an arms embargo and target only 55 people in official positions. These people are banned from entering EU territory and their assets are frozen. These sanctions are designed not to harm Venezuelan people. But despite its hard power attributes, the European Union faces weaknesses and multidirectional threats. The European Union faces multidirectional threats that require a strategic approach and cooperation among its member states. In the East, Russia is perceived as a threat due to its aggressive actions. The annexion of Crimea in 2014 and Russia's support for pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine since the same year are part of this headlong rush. These actions culminated in Russia's war in Ukraine starting in February 2022. In response, the EU adopted economic sanctions against Russia and strengthened its military presence in Eastern Europe. But south of the Mediterranean, the region faces also challenges such as political instability, armed conflict, terrorism, and migratory flows. The EU countries are under increasing pressure to address these challenges and find lasting solutions. However, differences in the perspective between member states can make it difficult to adopt a common approach. Some countries are more directly affected by these problems, while others feel less involved. This can sometimes lead to differences of opinion and difficulty in reaching a consensus within the EU. Some EU countries, such as France and Germany, have adopted a more global approach to security and defense, recognizing the importance of a common vision and enhanced cooperation in meeting international challenges. These two countries play a leading role in promoting defense cooperation within the EU and have expressed their willingness to strengthen European defense capabilities. The presence of French military vessels in the China Sea illustrates the commitment of France and therefore of the member states of the European Union to current international issues. It demonstrates France's willingness to act autonomously to defend its interests and support European values and interests in any areas of tension. As regards the interaction between EU and NATO, it's true that NATO has certain advantages over the EU, particularly in terms of integrated common capabilities and the participation of the United States. Nevertheless, the EU has also developed its own defense capabilities and is seeking to strengthen its strategic autonomy. It uses tools such as permanent structured cooperation and the European Defence Fund to promote defense cooperation and strengthen member states' military capabilities. The EUMS, the EU military staff, regularly assesses European military capabilities, identifies shortfalls, and make proposals to remedize them. For example, in the naval field, the European Union has more frigates and destroyers than the USA, but lags behind in terms of aircraft carriers, with only 5 aircraft carriers. Among them, only 3 have long-range operational capabilities. When it comes to nuclear attack submarines, the European Union has just 5 units, all of them French. It is true that the EU faces limits in terms of resources and military capabilities compared with the United States and NATO. However, initiatives are underway to improve the interoperability of Europe's armed forces and optimize the use of available resources. Emphasis is also placed on developing innovative defense capabilities and investing in defense research and development. Even if within the EU there are divergences between member states in terms of foreign and defense policy, which can make it difficult to adopt a unified vision and cooperate fully, the crisis in Ukraine has shown that in case of emergency, the European Union is capable of acting effectively and rapidly in response to a major crisis. It is important to underline that there is a growing awareness within the EU of the need to strengthen its military capability to deal with contemporary challenges and threats. Recent events such as the war in Ukraine and Russian actions have highlighted the importance of security and defense for Europe's stability. This has led to a shift in priorities and an increased willingness to cooperate and strengthen defense capabilities within the EU. But now, what is the way forward for European Union when we have seen that European Union is a leading actor on the international scene with his soft power that now is strengthening also the hard power part of its action? But how can this lead to a renewed role for the EU and positive role for the EU on the international scene? Because the question is how the EU can contribute very positively to the challenges not only in Europe, but on the global and the world scene. If you can see what is here, we can say that to ensure a solid future for the European Union, it's essential to strengthen the whole scope of its means of actions, both on the military front and in the area of soft power. To come back from a military standpoint, as a strengthening of capabilities is necessary to guarantee genuine strategic autonomy for the EU. This means investing in modern and effective projection and defense capabilities, including in areas such as anti-tank capabilities and naval deployment. By strengthening its military capabilities, the EU can make a greater contribution to the international security and stability, and will be able to respond effectively to emerging threats and crises. One avenue, for example, for improvement lies in the area of intelligence and intelligence sharing and the capacity of the European Union to respond to cyber attacks. At the same time, the EU has also an important role to play in the area of soft power. We have seen that its cultural, economic, and diplomatic influence can help to promote peace, stability, and European values in the world, and promoting European values in the world. The European Union is obviously ready to help the countries of the South to meet the challenges of climate change, particularly in financial terms. This is the spirit of the Summit for a New Global Financial Deal to be held in Paris on June 22 and 23, and of the Bridgetown Initiative launched by Mrs. Mia Mottley. The EU has several instruments at its disposal to implement these soft power actions. It can mobilize significant financial resources through its toolbox and dedicated funds to support post-crisis reconstruction and development efforts. So we have seen before that almost half of the public development aid already comes from the EU. The EU is really, but maybe it's not enough. Maybe we can seek for more involvement of EU in these new challenges, which are climate change, which needs more and more efforts to be done in the coming years. And one also decisive action of the EU to continue to have a more stable, a more secure world is that the EU plays a crucial role in providing political support for multilateralism, which consists of promoting international cooperation and solving global problems through negotiations and agreements among several players. This commitment to multilateralism faces challenges and pressures, not least Russian aggression, but we see many countries around the world which are not very favorable to multilateralism. I don't want to point some of them, but you know exactly which they are. To ensure a solid future, the EU must continue to defend and strengthen multilateralism in its actions and policies. The EU can play then the role of mediator and facilitator in international negotiations, thereby promoting the peaceful resolution of conflicts and respect for democratic principles and human rights. In addition, the EU must ensure that its commitment to multilateralism is reflected in its internal and external policies. This means supporting all the multilateral institutions, UN, and other international organizations, and also working for reforms to make this organization, including the United Nations, more effective, inclusive, and representative. The EU can also play an active role in promoting multilateralism through regional cooperation, and the question of cooperation between EU and CARICOM is also an important part of it. It's something which needs to be developed in the future. And strategic partnership with different regions all over the world. In conclusion, the European Union has undergone a remarkable evolution in recent decades and has succeeded in positioning itself as a major world power. You can see here, the European Union, how many countries in Europe are candidates to join the EU. The EU remains the strongest European organization as the most attractive one. Ukraine, Turkey, Bosnia, Serbia, Montenegro, Kosovo, North Macedonia, Albania, many countries which are not in the EU wants to join the EU because EU is a key and major international player. it's important to once again, in conclusion, to underline that the EU combines both soft and hard power in its action. It deploys soft power measures of the diplomacy, development aid, and promotion of democratic values to exert a positive influence. At the same time, the EU has also hard power resources. This combination is unique and gives the EU a credibility and a capacity for action on a global scale. The EU, I take the example, for example, of the operation in Chad, U4Chad. In U4Chad, EU was able to deploy in very short time a military operation to stop the attacks on refugees camp. But then, at the same moment, the EU also developed cooperation, health action in order to bring security, but also economic and health development to the local population. And this is something only EU can provide at the same time. Soft power means of actions and hard power means of action. And it's very important because it's the only world organization which has this ability. In an increasingly interconnected and complex world, the European Union has to continue to play a leading role as a global power, but while respecting the values and principles that are at the heart of its project. By strengthening its means of action and preserving its unity, the EU can then contribute to the promotion of a world order based on cooperation, democracy, respect of human rights, good governance, and solidarity, and thus shape a more secure and prosperous future for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for a very comprehensive and insightful presentation to us today, touching on a number of areas: social, economic, political, cultural efforts by the EU in terms of looking at this whole idea of security. I was particularly fascinated when you touched on some of the recommendations on the way forward, very importantly on the subject areas of climate change and cybersecurity. So at this point in time, we would like to open the floor, sir, for you, with your permission, of course, to entertain some questions, some comments, some queries. I see I've already been signaled by Dr. Martinez, our acting director. Dr. Martinez.
Yes, thank you so much. Very, very interesting session. As I said, a great topic to have our final session for the diplomatic dialogue. I have two, maybe three comments, and of course you answer as you wish. Well, the first has to do with the upcoming European Union CELAC Summit. I believe that could be, it has been presented as an opportunity to relaunch the regional dialogue between the two regions, the European Union and CELAC. And I would like to know what is your vision in terms of the main topics that could be at the center of this discussion. We have been talking about multilateralism, security, cooperation, climate change, and I believe these issues could have and should have a central part in the discussion between the European Union and CELAC countries. But I would like to get from you, which topics do you identify, which topics do you consider should be at the center of the discussion in this third summit that is going to happen pretty much 10 years. It has been 10 years since the second summit, so there has been a lot of time. So in terms of the key issues, again, what do you believe should be the main tone for the bi-regional dialogue? That should be the first one. The second one has to do with something that I have been seeing in terms of European Union documents and intrigues me a little bit in terms of the external projection and foreign policy of the European Union. And it's this principle of strategic autonomy. I would like to get from you, how do you see this strategic autonomy working in when addressing challenges that, as you have rightfully pointed out, need for the cooperation and need for a regional vision? I'm thinking about security, climate change, how this strategic autonomy could work in issues that actually demands for a joint regional action in Europe. And the third one has to do with the European Union relations with the Caribbean. I'm really happy that you mentioned how important is for the European Union certain issues that are very, very at the core of Caribbean challenges as climate change. And my question here has to do with how do you see this possibility for a closer dialogue between the European Union and the Caribbean happening? And I'm asking this because we have definitely this third summit between the European Union and CELAC, but this is a very large community of states talking there. The Latin American and the Caribbean together talking to the European Union, but within Latin American and the Caribbean has specific challenges. It is a group of the small economies, small countries, and perhaps, I'm just saying perhaps, the European Union might be thinking on having a type of closer or more reduced type of meeting with Caribbean leaders. I'm asking this also because I believe yesterday we had this meeting in Bahamas, the U.S. CARICOM leaders meeting. So I believe there is a new momentum for the CARICOM and the Caribbean relaunching also its external projection. So is the European Union thinking on going this direction? Again, you answer as you wish.
Yes, first on the CELAC meeting, it will really be a very important meeting, and the momentum is also very important, because we have had the impression, especially also with the break of the COVID, that the relation between the EU and the Latin American countries needed to be to receive a new impulse very clearly. And I think it will be the first important summit after, and the main topics will, of course, first also be economic, because both of EU and Latin American countries share economic interest, and we need to have also the biggest economic integration. There is Mercosur, for example, in South America. We have the free European market, so we need to discuss how to improve and facilitate the integration of the economy of both continents. And it's important because behind these economic and trade discussions, there is also more business opportunity, more employment, more economic growth possible for all the region. Then, of course, there will be also some discussions on political issues, because it's too big organization. I think that it's important to tackle the issue of the global impact of the war in Ukraine, because we have seen that inflation, increasing of agricultural products, it can also be something which can harm the people, not only in Europe, but outside Europe and in Latin America. And we need, of course, to discuss climate change. It's something which is very important, especially for the Caribbean region, because Caribbean region, there are a lot of islands which can suffer a lot for the consequences of the climate change. So we will have trade and economic, we will have discussions on, most probably, on the impact of the war in Ukraine, discussions on climate change. I'm not sure, I've not seen it, but it could also be the occasion. I'm not sure that it's still that it's on the agenda, but for example, the crisis in Haiti is a common challenge for first for the Caribbean region, but also for it's a global crisis because we cannot accept that such a big country is becoming a failed country. So we need to support, we need to provide a vision of how we can help Haiti to solve the international crisis without interference, but with also being helpful. So these are the main subjects. I'm not fully sure that IT will be on the agenda, but I think it will be also a subject which deserves some discussion between EU and CELAC countries. Then the autonomy, strategic autonomy of the EU, you obliged me to be very frank and direct. I was a young diplomat and I was the one who has for the first time, I wrote in a paper, which was the first draft of the common security and defense policy of the EU, the term autonomy is autonomy strategic. Why? Because when we put the first stone of the European military and defense policy, some people said, yeah, we have already a military organization in Europe, it's NATO. Why the EU should develop? So the EU defense policy should be on the umbrella of NATO. And we said, no, we have very friendly relation with our US friends, but the French defense and military policy will not be on the under the umbrella of the US. We have, as a French, we are autonomous actor, especially in the field of military and defense. So we need to have the same thing for the European Union. We need the European Union to have cooperation with NATO, but not subordination to NATO. So that's the reason NATO and EU are two friendly organizations which cooperates in terms of security and defense, but EU has the strategic autonomy. It can decide by itself. We don't need to go to NATO and ask for the permission to launch one of these peacekeeping operations. So it's very important, and it was especially important at the beginning when we launched the first basis of the military and defense policy of EU, because we have been under so strong pressure to put the military defense and military policy under the umbrella of NATO. So friendship, yes, cooperation, yes, subordination, no. This is the reason of why this term is so important for Europe. Then the Caribbean region, I think even more than for Latin American, for CELAC, there is a lack of enough cooperation between Caribbean region and EU region. There is no CARICOM EU summit. For example, CARICOM is an organization which has also an objective of more and more integration between member states. So as European Union, why these two organizations, which has the same basic principle, are not discussing? This is a real question, and I have not the answer, because my feeling is that it's a mistake. A relationship between Caribbean region and the European Union must be stronger, must be more regular, with bilateral visits, with more joint meetings between Caribbean states and EU organizations. So it must be strengthened. There is a lack and there is a need of more cooperation between EU and Caribbean countries. I will also be very frank and very direct.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
The minister has a question, Ms. Madukera.
Sure. So, well, Professor Dukaran, please.
Thank you, Ambassador, for a very clear exposition here today. and a deep analytical one that puts everything in perspective. I wanted to really follow through on your last comment about cooperation between CARICOM and the European Union, specifically in the context of your global security concerns. And I'm happy that the ambassador for Germany is here, because while there have not been a summit between CARICOM and the European Union, as far as I'm aware, and you probably confirmed it, there was a summit between Germany and the European Union some years ago, which I, in my previous capacity, attended. And one of the issues that was raised at that summit was Trinidad and Tobago's bid at that time to host the Secretariat of the United Nations Small Trade Treaty. That was long in the making, and we in the Caribbean considered it an important security arm of a global nature that had to be addressed. And we sought the support then of many European countries. Regrettably, we lost the vote by one in the end, but the end result is that it went to an European country. But an assurance that was given by the European countries at the time, at that critical vote, was that the reach of the European countries and interest to the security concerns of the Caribbean will not be lost. And that this UN Small Arms Trade Treaty, which was now going to be headquartered in Switzerland, will have a strong reach into the Caribbean. I don't know if there has been any development since, or whether or not that reach has in fact been in the pipeline, or if you wish to comment, or indeed Ambassador for Germany, because they were one of the key countries who were seeking to look at that particular issue. So my question really is to see what is the follow-up on the security concerns of the European country via the UN Small Arms Trade Treaty.
Thank you, Minister. I think it comes back on one of the points I mentioned before. It's a commitment of EU to be fully in support of multilateral instruments, and we remain completely committed to small arms and light weapons treaty. The question is, the problem is for the region, and including it has also impact on French security, because we have Martinique and Guadeloupe. And the circulation of light arms in the regions, it don't only arrive in Trinidad and Tobago, they arrive in Martinique, they arrive in Guadeloupe, and it's also a challenge for us. So it's something very important, but I can ensure you that these arms are not coming from Europe. For sure. And I don't know, maybe we have to think on how we can tackle the issue on a European approach, but nationally we are more and more eager to be more present in the region. We mentioned CARICOM. Martinique and Guadeloupe are candidates to join CARICOM as associate member. I don't know if the CARICOM members will give a positive answer to this request. So they are already associate member from ACS, Association Caribbean States, from OACS, but not to CARICOM. I cannot understand why, and I hope that in the Chaguarama summit, Martinique and Guadeloupe will receive a very positive and friendly answer from the leaders of the region. But we also propose to the Trinidadian government an agreement in order to start partnership and cooperation in the training and security field. For example, to have joint exercises with naval and security forces in Trinidad, or to invite security forces from Trinidad in Martinique for joint training. So now we are in discussions with the authority of Trinidad, how we can organize. We proposed a bilateral agreement to fix the conditions. So we are really very ready to be much more present in the region. And so for the same for the European Union, because Caribbean problems soon or later comes to Europe. If you consider drug trafficking, the drug dealers are not stopping in Trinidad or in Santa Lucia or in Martinique, they continue to Europe. So your challenges in terms of security are our challenges, and we have to face these challenges together. So that's the reason it's important for CARICOM and EU to strengthen the relationship. This must be discussed. I'm not the magic one to say immediately what could be the instruments for strengthening the relationship, but there must be an increased cooperation between CARICOM itself and CARICOM countries with Europe and EU member states. This is for sure, because we need to have common solutions to the problem.
Okay, thank you very much, Ambassador. So we have a number of questions. You've done a great presentation. So of course, we're going to be flooded by a number of questions. So let me just recognize the presence of Ambassador Melendez, who is online from Mexico. And the question has been posed by the ambassador. What is the probability that Sweden will join NATO? And what would be the next steps?
I think I'm almost sure that Sweden will join NATO. The question is when. It means we know that there is a NATO member state that is opposing a veto for the time being. I don't know if there are ongoing discussions, so maybe the veto can be lifted soon. But I will say to my Swedish friends, go more involved in the European defense security policy. Then it will be, if you demonstrate within EU that you are much more active as a partner of the common defense and security policy, then you will have even much more argument to join NATO.
Okay, wonderful. And we have a number of questions posed by one of our former directors at the Institute, Dr. Anthony Gonzalez.
Yeah.
So Dr. Gonzalez, so I will pose two questions. He already has three questions in the chat, and thanks to technology, I'm using my phone, so I'm getting the questions and comments. And please feel free for those of you online to post your questions on the chat for us. So one of the questions that he's asking is, isn't the European Union power in the world declining relative to the rise of China and the BRICS in general? And the second question is, does strategic autonomy not require more integration and cohesion in the EU to reduce EU dependency on the United States?
Two good questions. It's obvious that we have, the last 20 years, we have seen the rise of a new world power, which is China. It's very clear on, if you consider every criteria of which can be identified of being a power or not a power, now China has all the criteria of one of the leading world power. The question is, China a positive power in the establishment of world security, world? For the time being, there is a lot of concerns which way China wants to follow, not only in the term of global security, but in terms of human rights. Very simply, where is the opposition in China? What is the situation of human rights? There is a lot of questions which needs to be answered. what is the contribution to China to a more secure world? It's really a question. We see we have now the crisis in Ukraine, and we see the rising of tensions in the China Sea. So we have some questions. I'm not so sure. I hope that China, because everyone would like China to be not only a major stakeholder of the international world order, but also a positive player. But for the time being, the role of China raises more concern than positive answer. And the BRICS, what are the BRICS without China?
True.
What are the BRICS without China? This is a question. I think the question behind the BRICS is a question of China. Of course, Russia is member of the BRICS, but if you consider within the BRICS, you have two countries, Russia and China, which are not, we cannot describe them as real democratic countries. No real elections, no human rights, no. So we have some, I would say we must be careful, because BRICS sounds very nice, and there is within the BRICS countries which are very important for regional and international peace and stability, such as Brazil, such as South Africa, such as India. But if you consider what is really behind the BRICS, I come back to my first remark. What are the BRICS without China?
Dr. Gonzalez, his other question has to do, how is the EU using its power to mitigate strategic competition between the United States and China, and thus reduce potential world conflict?
Yeah, first, I think I missed one question on strategic autonomy, but it's also linked to the second question. First, we have a very long-standing friendly relation with the US. Of course, there is competition in the field of economy, but we share the same values. We share the same interest for a world more stable, more secure, and so we want to have autonomy because we are independent. We have been independent 1,000 years before the US. So we want to continue to be independent at least 1,000 years after the independence of the US. So it's important for us to preserve our full autonomy. It's not even a question. We are a full independent state. France is fully independent. Europe has its full strategic autonomy, but we share a lot of things in common with the US, starting from the attention to human rights, with democratic principles, with human values principles. So the question of the strategic autonomy of EU is important, but it must not be too much over-evaluated. We are with the US in the same boat. The question is, we need to go in the same direction. Not one wanted to go north and the other one going to south. On the question of economic relation, I think that we have joint economic interest with the US, but we have also some economic competition. Economic competition between us and economic competition in our relation with China. But on some very specific strategic issue, we need to be together. For example, of the question on 5G, we need to share the same approach. On many questions which are linked to China, we need to have China as a very friendly an economic partner, because we are in favor of an open world. We are not in favor of a multipolar pole world, which each pole close to himself. We want, as European Union, to have an open world, and we need to have with China a peaceful relation, including in the economic field, but we must also be aware that China plays another game, and we must be careful of some cooperation, free trade, yes, but intrusion, no. And in some specific economic sectors which has strategic importance, we must be very careful.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency. I do have a question for you, sir. And so I lecture in the area of diplomacy. And I always take the opportunity once we have accredited officials to ask them, what's your position with regard to the digitalization of the diplomatic field?
I think diplomacy is a little bit like personal relation. You can have a digitalized relation with some nice person, but if you want to know more of him or her, you need to have personal contacts. Love by digitalization is not the same as love with physical contacts. And it's the same with diplomacy.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. So I am just looking at the chat box. I don't know if anybody has any further comments or questions in this time. Yes. Okay. So sure. So Ambassador, so I just turn the floor over now to the German ambassador. Ambassador.
Thank you. I just wanted to take this opportunity to come back to the question of Professor Dukevan regarding the small arms issue, and just to inform you and the audience that Germany, even after the conference you mentioned, followed up to its promise, and we have been actively pursuing with the CARICOM states a roadmap for small arms. And at the recent crime symposium that was hosted in Port of Spain, we were presenting a survey that was funded by Germany, and we promised that this cooperation with CARICOM impacts and UN LIRAC, that they are involved in this, will continue. I myself assisted at several national conferences to work on national plans to give room to this roadmap. A lot of the recent discussions have been virtually. This brings me to the answer of my French colleague, and you ask a French colleague and he comes back to love. That's really wonderful. And I think maybe some of the results were lost because these conferences were also held virtually. So I think we are all glad that we're back to real life encounters and seeing each other in the eyes when we're talking. So thank you for that question, and it's not lost. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. So I now invite our newly minted Dr. Graduate, Dr. Lisa Gordon.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sham. Is the microphone on? Okay, great. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur, pour votre présentation très intéressante. J'ai appris beaucoup des informations là-dessus. Et donc, je vais continuer justement en anglais. I'm going to continue in English. So there are two comments I have to make and one question. So with reference to the fact that Martinique and Guadeloupe may not be, there are still negotiations ongoing for them to be associate members of CARICOM. I'm perhaps you could correct me on this. I think it's because of the fact that there is a sort of dilemma that they face, in the sense that they are seen by the EU and by France as an extension of the interests of the European Union. in terms of diplomacy, in terms of trade. They're seen as perhaps tools to expand the influence of the EU and France in the Americas. So how would you reconcile a diplomatic agenda being strategized in hexagonal France and continental Europe with a regional organization that is based in the Caribbean, CARICOM, which would have different priorities? So that is something that, you know, it's just a comment. The second one, the second comment has to do with the fact of, oh my goodness, I've lost my train of thought, but most likely it will come back to me when I pose to you this particular question. It's relative to culture and soft power. So has the EU thought about already using its strong positioning as culture as a tool of soft power to deal with, you know, existential crises in terms of war, like what is happening in the Ukraine? I ask this because as you already know, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur, I have the book International Trade and the Music Industry. And in chapter 5, I go into examining what happens, what the model that is used by South Korea to use their culture to advance the socio-political and socio-economic priorities that are important to them. For instance, they use their popular culture with their band BTS, for example, to advance the priority issues of their country. So when BTS, perhaps a few months ago, visited the White House, it was not, you know, something that was just to be seen lightly. But BTS, that Korean boy band group, went there to discuss or to bring attention to Asian hate, East Asian hate that was happening, you know, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and irresponsible leaders, of course, stating that COVID-19 pandemic is a China virus. So to speak, the irresponsible leaders will remain unnamed, but that's it. So I just wondered, and I went into more detail in my book, as to whether in dealing with serious issues, if using popular culture, just as what South Korea does, could be used as a tool of soft power. And I dare say China uses it as well, but in another extent. So they don't use popular culture, but when they positioned themselves in the developing countries, they positioned themselves as, we are equal partners. We're not here to give you aid. We're here on an equal footing, trade, not aid. And I'm wondering if in developing, in reconfiguring the EU's relationship with the developing world, whether that kind of soft power that it has been used by China and that kind of soft power that is currently being used in South Korea could be perhaps adopted in the EU. So I can't remember my other question, but yeah, thank you.
Yes, the question on Martinique and Guadeloupe. Of course, Martinique and Guadeloupe, and it's for them a decision, are part of the French Republic. And therefore, because France is part of the EU, Martinique and Guadeloupe are part of the global EU common market. But Martinique and Guadeloupe are not asking to be full member of the CARICOM. They are asking to be associate member. And they are already partners, for example, for many agencies and institutions of the CARICOM. We had some months ago the visit of a delegation coming from Martinique to sign a bilateral agreement with the CARFA on the field of the fight against cancer disease. So we have also cooperation between Martinique and the CARICOM in the field of natural disaster response. Of course, it will be almost impossible for Martinique and Guadeloupe to be member of CARICOM because you cannot at the same time be member of two free trade zones. So it's absolutely impossible in the current conditions to be member of both organizations. But this is not what Martinique and Guadeloupe are asking. They are asking to join as associate members. And we had a very important evolution in the French law, thanks to the current president of Martinique, Mr. Serge Letchimy. He made adopted by the French Parliament a law, the Loi Letchimy, which gives to the French territories international competencies. Of course, not competencies in the defense sector, not competencies in the justice sector, but in many fields of culture, education, the competencies, including the international competencies, are in the hands of the French local territories of the region. So they have the capacity by themselves to act as international actor separately from the French state. In that field, of course, which has been identified in the Letchimy law. So it's possible. And once again, they are not asking to be full member. It will be absolutely impossible. And they are fully aware of this. They just want to increase the cooperation on many fields, health, and already an ongoing cooperation with CARFA has been developed. It can be on impacts, crime and security. President Letchimy was invited to the CARICOM symposium in April, which has been held in Port of Spain. So in many fields, they can act as positive partner for the CARICOM because they are part of the CARICOM. And they are very eager to develop joint policy with all the countries in the region, and they are already in developing cooperation tools with OSCE countries. They have been also very active in the SES summit of Antigua. For example, Martinique has the presidency of the Commission of Transport of the SES, and Guadeloupe has the vice presidency of the Sea Commission of the SES. So it means that these French territories are really ready to engage as international actors in the region. That's the reason I hope personally that a positive answer could be given to these French territories, and they could join the Caribbean community as associate member of the CARICOM.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Unfortunately, we have really exhausted our time, but this has been such a engaging and interactive session with you. And in keeping with good protocols, I will now invite one of our students here at the Institute, Ms. Linda Delay, to do the vote of thanks. Ms. Delay.
Good afternoon to Dr. LaGuardia Martinez, Acting Director of the IIR, Dr. Chamy, Lecturer at the IIR, His Excellency Didier Chabert, Ambassador of France to Trinidad and Tobago, Her Excellency Ute Connie, Ambassador of Germany to Trinidad and Tobago, His Excellency Victor Melendez, Ambassador of Mexico to Trinidad and Tobago, members of the Diplomatic Corps, Professor Lancelot Cowie, Professor Winston Ducaran, Dr. Lisa Gordon, other distinguished guests, and all IIR and wider U.W.I staff and students and members of the public. My name is Linda Dalai, and I am a student at the IIR, it is my privilege to deliver a vote of thanks to everyone who have worked to make this diplomatic dialogue today as engaging and successful as it has been. On behalf of the IIR student body, I would like to say a special thank you to His Excellency, Ambassador Chabert, for delivering the feature presentation today and for taking the time to share his knowledge and expertise via a very interesting presentation on the positive contributions made by the European Union to global security by employing both soft power and hard power strategies in order to preserve peace and strengthen international security, as well as by engaging in international cooperation, research, development, and innovation. This is especially important given that the threats, such as transnational organized crime, climate change, and cyber threats have been increasingly unfolding on a global scale and have been adversely affecting the Latin America and Caribbean region. Thank you for skillfully answering all questions and for bringing such an analytical perspective to the security discourse. The insights you have shared today were well received by all present. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur. I also wish to thank the Institute for organizing this very interesting and insightful diplomatic dialogue, with special thanks to the IT staff for facilitating virtual attendance and participation. Finally, I would like to thank each participant present for taking time out of your busy schedules to enlighten us with your thoughts, wisdom, and ideas. Your attendance and participation have allowed for such truly enriching and productive discussions. Thank you so very much.
Very much, Mr. Lai, and I think she has summarized quite nicely for us the thank you notes. So in closing, I would once again just like to thank His Excellency for his presidency at the Institute of International Relations with us today. And for those of you who have joined us virtually and face-to-face, thank you very much. Please keep checking our websites for upcoming or further webinars. You could also contact the IIR Secretariat, who remains committed and always willing and supportive. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today, and may I wish you a good weekend. Take care, keep well.